Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to come back to my question to the Prime Minister about the need to address the subsidies that are being given to the oil and gas industry. I'll start by sharing why this is important. I'll start with sharing what the UN Secretary General recently shared with the world. He said, "We are on a highway to climate hell with our foot on the accelerator. We are on the fight of our lives and we are losing while our planet is fast approaching tipping points that will make climate chaos irreversible." He went on to say, "The global climate fight will be won or lost in this crucial decade on our watch." We also have heard from the co-chair of climate scientists making up the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, Jim Skia. Mr. Skia said, "It's now or never if we want to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius without immediate and deep emissions reductions across all sectors, it will be impossible." Now, while we have those global calls being made, profits in the oil and gas industry are off the rails. Imperial Oil, as one example that I mentioned to the PM in my question, their profits are up and totaling now $6.2 billion in the first 9 months of 2022. That's compared to $1.7 billion in the same period in 2021. It's 4 times higher. Why? Well, it's obvious. They're gouging Canadians at the pumps. In the same period of time, we know that wholesale margins, i.e. profits, are up 18 cents a litre. Now, turning to promises that are being made. We had the PM at Glasgow last year at COP26, where he promised to end international financing of oil and gas. That hasn't happened yet. It's also promised in the supply and confidence agreement between the Liberals and the NDP that provides them the confidence of this House to phase out public financing of the fossil fuel sector, including early moves in 2022. This would be a great time for those early moves because instead what we're seeing are new subsidies being added. 2 examples, $8.6 billion more in a tax credit for so-called carbon capture and storage. This is a false solution being peddled by the oil and gas industry. Study after study shows, in fact, 32 out of 40 times this has been tried around the world, Mr. Speaker, emissions have gone up and not down. It's the #1 item in the so-called emissions reduction plan. Or we can turn to the $10 billion loan guarantee for the Trans Mountain Pipeline. We know there are solutions. #1, end the subsidies now. All of them. Introduce a windfall profits tax on these excess profits, as I'd asked the Prime Minister to do in my question. And then use the funds to invest in proven climate solutions. The Green Budget Coalition, for example, points to deep energy retrofits in residential buildings that would return $2 to $5 in taxes to the public coffers on every dollar spent. In a just transition for workers, the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives calling for a just transition benefit. The fact is, our kids' futures are at stake. This is about the world they're going to grow up in. And so I understand the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance is with us tonight. I would love to hear from him to share more about when will the government stop dragging its heels on ending these subsidies.
Secretary to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Well, thank you, Mr. I'll start by sharing the sentiment of my friend from Kitchener Centre with regards to the urgency of this issue and with regards to making sure that we get this right for the sake of our children and all children across Canada and around the world. Mr. Speaker, Canada remains committed to phasing out inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. We have already taken action to phase out 9 tax measures supporting the fossil fuel sector. We've also pledged to undertake a peer review of inefficient fossil fuel subsidies under the G20 process. The reality, Mr. Speaker, is that Canada fought hard at COP27 so that the world did not backslide on the phasing out of fossil fuel subsidies. We reiterated our commitment to phase out inefficient fossil fuel subsidies by 2023, 2 years earlier than the G20 commitment. Now, Mr. Speaker, some have argued, including the speaker that just spoke, that our recent measures to support the emerging carbon capture, use and storage sector amount to an inefficient fossil fuel subsidy. This is not true. The fact is, CCUS is one of many tools in our toolbox to meet our climate commitments. And I would note that many respected global organizations support CCUS development. This includes the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and the Paris-based International Energy Agency. In fact, the agency estimates that this technology could be responsible for about 15% of global emission reductions. It's part of the plan. It also gives us a tool to lower emissions outside of the oil and gas sector. Steel production, cement, and other emission-intensive industries can benefit from this technology. This, in fact, builds on our world-leading climate plan, one that approaches reducing emissions and developing clean technology in all facets of our economy, and one that we further expanded on in the fall economic statement tabled earlier this month. While we are removing tax credits from flow-through shares on oil, gas, and coal, we are also creating new investment tax credits for clean tech and for clean hydrogen. We are also creating a sustainable jobs training center that will prepare our workers for the high-paying sustainable jobs that will be created as new economic opportunities emerge as part of our climate plan. In addition, we are investing in a world-leading innovation and investment agency and a $15 billion clean growth fund that will help Canada further tap into the economic opportunities that the clean transition provides. That being said, Mr. Speaker, our government's priority beyond fighting climate change and growing an economy that works for everyone is to make life more affordable for Canadians who are currently struggling with global inflation. Indeed, we are now moving forward with targeted measures, including new ones introduced in the fall economic statement. For example, Bill C-32 would make the federal portion of all Canada student loans and Canada apprenticeship loans permanently interest-free, including those currently being repaid. We are expanding our efforts with regards to affordable housing, and we are making sure that every child in Canada, no matter how wealthy their parents are, have access to affordable dental care. This is in addition to our investments that have lifted millions of children and seniors out of poverty, including an early learning and childcare agreement that will make our kids smarter and allow hundreds of thousands of parents to rejoin the workforce if they choose to do so. Finally, we've doubled the GST benefit to help 11 million Canadian households, including more than 50% of seniors, better handle the impacts of global inflation. Any responsible plan must tackle climate change in a way where no one is left behind in our economy, and that is exactly what our government is doing, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Kitchener Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll pause just to say this word inefficient. I hope the parliamentary secretary might move away from it. It's completely undefined. It lacks credibility when we're talking about these subsidies because it really doesn't mean anything at all. And in fact, all of these subsidies are not helping us make progress at a time when we need to act urgently and immediately. In terms of carbon capture and storage, I think the best analogy I can give the parliamentary secretary is that there are measures being taken, some of which he's mentioned. And those measures are kind of like after the snow has fallen and you start shoveling one bit at a time and you're making a little bit of progress here and there. The $8.6 billion to carbon capture is like when the snowplow then comes by and undoes all of your work. That $8.6 billion, not one environmental group in the country has called for those funds. You know who has? The oil and gas lobbyists who were at COP27. Unfortunately, those are the ones who are calling for carbon capture. When will the minister or the parliamentary secretary understand we've got to move away from exactly that?
Parliamentary secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government is committed to phasing out inefficient fossil fuel subsidies, and while my colleague may not like the definition around that particular word inefficient, that's a longer debate that I can't explain in 1 minute, but we are committed to undergo a peer review of inefficient fossil fuel subsidies under the G20 process and why we will build on the action that we've already taken. So there is a process that we're going under the G20. So while that definition may not meet his standards today, there is a process under which this is specifically reviewed. If Canadians want to know more, I suggest they read our emissions reduction plan, which lays out in detail how Canada will hit our targets right across every sector of the economy. And they can also tap into my own reports that I write at terrybeachmp.ca/reports. There isn't just a report on climate change. There's one on affordability, seniors, housing, the economy, and local projects that are important to all Canadians, but in particular to those projects that have been delivered in both Burnaby and in North Vancouver. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.